It's been more than 2 months since I've used the Nothing Phone 2 as my main phone, and no lies, it's already up there for me as one of the best all-around phones that I've ever used. Starting at just $599, competing against $1,000 devices from major brands, it's obviously not going to be the best in any single category, but the thoughtful choices and the right compromises makes it a really great all-around phone for lots of people. Sadly, it also doesn't really stand out in anything particular, so it's not going to move the non-tech fans from their Apple and Samsung devices. But for tech fans watching this video, this phone is definitely worth considering, especially for what it brings at this price. First of all, it just looks really interesting, and that feeling does go away a bit, but every time I do look at it light up, my little brain goes crazy. It's still just a standard glass and aluminum non-folding phone and doesn't do anything groundbreaking. It's also not actually transparent because the internal components are covered by these white cover pieces, but phones just don't look like this on the back, and it's awesome. Those lighting effects are called glyphs, and besides being a slightly customizable notification and charging indicator, they don't do too much in functionality. But it really doesn't matter, the back does its job in differentiating itself from other phones. Besides looking really different, it's also a high quality functional piece of hardware. It's flat on all sides and edges, including the display panel, so it's really easy to grip and feels really nice in the hand. The back glass curves very slightly so the edges don't dig into your hands as much. That won't matter to most people since you'll most likely be rocking a case, but what does matter is that it's super light. This phone and its display are as big as the iPhone 15 Pro Max or the Galaxy S23 Ultra, but is lighter than both those phones by 20 to 30 grams. The flat edges do make it feel thicker than most phones with rounded edges, especially when you put on a case, but because of the lightweight, it's really comfortable to hold for its size. But because this phone is made to show off the back and it's not from a major brand, you're not going to have a lot of options for cool looking third-party cases besides clear ones like this. Link is down below if you're interested. Haptics are also very good and up there with iPhones and Samsung Galaxy devices. You can also choose from a variety of vibration and glyph patterns, so you have some additional customization right there. The volume and power buttons feel great, not the most satisfying sound, but very clicky and you won't have to worry about them falling off. There's no headphone jack or micro SD slot, but the SIM tray can take 2 physical SIMs. There is no eSIM support here, which is a bummer, but I appreciate that Nothing still included support for dual physical SIMs. The bezels on the front are also very thin and they're even on all edges, which is nice. The bezels aren't the thinnest in the market, but it's just marginal returns if it's thinner than this. The display is a big 6.7 inch LTPO OLED with 1080p resolution and a variable refresh rate up to 120Hz. As an OLED, it looks really nice for all kinds of content and super smooth and responsive for fast-paced gaming. Really deep blacks, and Nothing tuned this display to be really color vibrant. I think they turned it up a little too much because there's a slight orangey warm tone, but I wouldn't say it's a problem. Brightness is also no problem here. I do turn it up all the way in direct sunlight, but it's perfectly viewable in all kinds of situations. In complete darkness with the extra dim mode on, it gets low enough for me to use during the night before bed. There's also the optical in-display fingerprint reader. It's fast enough for daily use, but it still blinds me at night with a big flash of light, and it still doesn't come close in speed to an ultrasonic or a physically mounted sensor. I'm really hoping that Nothing Phone 3 at least has an ultrasonic sensor. You do have the other option, which is face unlock, but it's not as secure, so you can't use it for major authentication like payments and purchases. Since this is OLED, there's the always on display or AOD, which is nice, but unfortunately through this feature, I found that the Nothing Phone 2 seems to be using a lower quality OLED panel. Within the first week of using this phone, I've experienced noticeable burn-in from the AOD. I've even had to send this in for exchange, but the issue weirdly goes away after the screen is turned off for a few hours. So Nothing couldn't replicate the issue and they sent it back to me. I was able to replicate the issue again after trying AOD, but also solved it by turning off AOD. Since then, I haven't used AOD and just hope Nothing can fix it with a firmware update. Except for this issue that might not be on every unit, I'm very satisfied with the display here. There are dual serial speakers here using the earpiece in the bottom part and grill, but the speakers are somewhere I think Nothing made a bit more of a sacrifice on. First, they're not super loud. On other flagship phones, I had the media volume set to only about 50 to 60% when watching YouTube videos or listening to music. Here, I feel like I need the volume to be at 70 to 80% most of the time. Plus, the quality just isn't as crisp as you would find on the Pixel 7 Pro or the Galaxy S23. It's close, but you can tell it doesn't have as much of a range as the more high-end phones. The distortion isn't the worst, but it's definitely there at higher volume levels. The good news is that some of the firmware updates does seem to have solved the unevenness of the speakers. When watching or listening to something, the earpiece and the bottom part and grill sound pretty even now. So far so good, but where the Nothing Phone 2 might fall short to a lot of people is the camera, which is noticeably a downgrade from high-end options from Apple, Samsung, Google, and Xiaomi. The Nothing Phone 2 has a single 32 megapixel front-facing camera, On the back is a dual camera system with a 50 megapixel main and a 50 megapixel ultra wide lens. As you can see, it's missing a telephoto lens, which means you can't get optical zoom shots and you're limited to digital crops here. I think it still looks respectable up to 2x shots, but past that point it starts to get very mediocre in detail. If you like to be creative with zoom shots and perspectives, you might want to go for a phone with a telephoto. But surprisingly, even without a telephoto lens, I've been very satisfied with this portrait mode shots here in good daylight. Very good detail, and the blur behind the subject is cut out nicely and doesn't look overly artificial. This also applies for standard 1x daylight photos, which I've been very happy with. You get nice detail and the post-processing doesn't go too overboard. Sometimes it does a little too much with the colors, especially greens and yellows, but in general the post-processing is pretty balanced and I like how it captures and processes skin tones and faces. It doesn't give off an overly HDR look like some phones do, but these days even OnePlus and Motorola phones get very good results in daylight, so this isn't super impressive. The Nothing Phone 2 starts to suffer in tougher lighting conditions. Indoors, it keeps missing the mark in exposure and white balance. When there is a strong light source in the back, it really struggles to balance the foreground subject and the bright background. In low light, it really depends on you staying as still as possible. Even a tiny bit of movement can ruin the photo. Sometimes you get some nice shots if there's enough light sources, but it's just not a reliable camera in tougher lighting conditions. As for video recording, the Nothing Phone 2 is a respectable vlogging camera. You can check out my vlogging test that I posted on my channel, and it looked pretty great with good stabilization and auto adjustments to changing environments and lighting. But while it can record up to 4K 60 FPS with the rear camera, you can only shoot up to 1080p 60 FPS for the front camera. For a 32 megapixel camera, I feel like it should definitely be able to shoot in 4K, but that's not the case here. Another downside to video recording here is that the microphones are just subpar. Just like with the speaker audio, nothing is compromising on the mics here for the camera, which is a bit of a bummer. In terms of general quality and stabilization, I think this phone is up there with the best of Android. But the front camera's weird 1080p cap and the not good microphones are just some weird compromises that even non-techies will notice. But besides the camera being pretty average, everything else about this phone from this point is pretty awesome. Nothing OS 2.0 is Nothing's custom software on top of Android 13 and it's great. Very little pre-installed apps, minimal and clean settings and menus, very close to Pixel UI, quick and smooth app launching and switching animations giving off a very smooth iPhone-like experience. Even when non-tech users have tried my phone, they told me it feels like iOS, which is a big compliment from regular iPhone-only users. It's not just a minimal software experience either. There's a lot of customization options here to make the software more personalized for you. I love Nothing's monochromatic theme, custom folders that you can resize and change the icons and look, and the custom widgets with aesthetic fonts, and quick settings you can turn on and off straight from the home screen. You can even put these quick setting widgets on the lock screen. Now, if you think this look is a bit messy, you also have the option to use a standard stock Android look. It's really up to you, which is nice to have options. I'm also a big multitasker, and even though you don't have edge panels or super quick multitasking gestures like you do on One UI, Nothing OS has a really convenient gesture where you can swipe up to open pop-up view. I do this all the time with YouTube and streaming apps. This is so much more convenient than going to recent apps, tapping the icon, and tapping split screen or pop-up view. I still wish there was a faster gesture to do split screen multitasking, but this is already a really nice addition and I wish they added something like this to Pixel UI too. You do get some glyph customization here. You can customize the light up sequence for certain contacts and calls. You can also use this as a status bar for timers and for Uber rides, but it's really only for Uber rides and Zomato food deliveries. Those are the only third-party integrations available right now. There's also the flip to glyph feature, which lights up your phone whenever you put it face down like this, which makes everyone go whoa just for that first time. It automatically silences your phone, so you're relying on those glyphs to notify you without disturbing you with loud ringtones. But since those lights are so bright, it's actually a little too distracting for me versus a blank screen. Nothing is promising up to 3 major OS updates and 4 years of bi-monthly security updates. In the Android market, that's very respectable, and not only is the update schedule appealing, Nothing really personalizes each firmware and security update. They're very transparent and fun about what each update brings in benefits and fixes for the end user. It makes me feel like they actually care about the product and user experience after the sale, which not a lot of new tech companies are that good at. I'll make sure to revisit this part next year to see how that support ages. Inside, the Nothing Phone 2 has a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 processor, Adreno 730 GPU, up to 12 gigs of RAM, and UFS 3.1 storage. The model in this video has 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, so keep that in mind. Unlike the standard Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 is known to be a more efficient chip with less heat issues and better stability. Thankfully, that's also what I've been experiencing with the Nothing Phone 2. It's not the newest Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and the internal storage isn't UFS 4.0, but thanks to Nothing's software optimization with fine-tuned animations and memory management, this feels like the smoothest phone I've tested in a long time for day-to-day usage and general home screen navigation. It's actually very good with heat management too. The heat on this phone is never that noticeable and stays cool even if you're updating 20 apps while multitasking or shooting long 4K clips. I also found the general connectivity like cell connection, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth to be very stable here. And raw peak performance for things like max graphics on Genshin Impact or photo and video export speeds is still behind the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and of course Apple's new A17 chipset. But for people who love the smooth general user experience of iOS, the Nothing Phone 2 gives you the closest version of that on the Android side. Nothing Phone 2 is still a relatively new device though, so we'll have to see how it ages when we revisit it in 2024, but I'm very satisfied here in terms of speed and performance. I have similar thoughts about the battery life, which has been really impressive. The Nothing Phone 2 has a 4700 mAh battery, and again, that efficient Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip inside. With a heavy weekend day outside, the Nothing Phone 2 gets me from 6 to 7 hours of screen on time until I'm at around 15%. On a really light day when I barely use my phone at work, I end the day with maybe 50% left with 4 hours of screen on time. So sometimes I can get up to 2 days of use, which is super impressive. Compared to my main phones in the last 2 years, this is the best battery life I've had, so I'm very happy about that. For charging through the USB-C port, the Nothing Phone 2 can get up to 45 watts. With a big battery and not having the fastest charging speed, charging from 20 to 100% takes the standard amount of time, just under an hour and 30 minutes. But if you do need a quick juice, it's still really fast for that. Okay, with all that said, you can probably tell why the Nothing Phone 2 is one of my favorite phones ever. Starting at just $599, it gets so many key things right for me. A high quality, interesting design, a big OLED display, functional and personalized software, smooth, consistent performance, and fantastic battery life. If there was a telephoto lens and the post-processing for the camera was maybe 30% better, I can almost call this a perfect phone for me. Still, it's such a great all-around deal. If you're considering a new phone soon, just stop by the buy page for the Nothing Phone 2 and at least take a look. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the Nothing Phone 2 if you're considering it as your next phone. Or if you're not, let me know in the comments what else you're looking at and why you might go for that instead of this phone. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys on the next video.